The well should not have been warm. Lenora pressed her palm flat against the mossy stone rim and felt it. Not the cold of mountain rock in October, but something breathed up from below. Living air. Her sister Millie leaned over the dark circle and went very still. "There's a sound," Millie whispered. Neither of them stepped back. 3 weeks earlier, their father had stood at the kitchen table, with the land deed between his hands, looking at his daughters the way a man looks at something he loves and must now release. "A worthless patch," their mother had said quietly, not cruelly. "Rocky ground, high ridge, no timber worth cutting, no soil worth turning." Their father had said nothing to contradict her. He had only slid the deed across the table. "Now prove what you're made of." The Wren farm sat in the lower valley of Elkshade Basin, where the soil was dark and the pasture long, and the mountains above it looked decorative from a distance, blue-gray shapes that meant weather coming or weather past. Edwin and Ruth Wren had built that farm from a single room and $30 and 20 years of steady intention, and everyone in the valley knew it. They were not wealthy people, but they were solid people, which in Colorado Territory in 1887 meant nearly the same thing. Lenora and Millie had grown up knowing the farm the way they knew their own hands. Lenora, the elder by 11 minutes, had her father's habit of silence before speaking, and her mother's eye for what needed doing without being told. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket, in which she recorded things she wanted to understand. Which pasture dried fastest in summer? Which posts leaned after frost? How the south-facing kitchen wall stayed warm 2 hours past sundown? Millie had no notebook. What Millie had was a quality harder to name, an ease with the uncertain, a readiness to be surprised. She was the one who had first noticed the flock of evening growbeaks in the elm the previous spring, and stood watching them long past the time there was anything useful to observe, simply because they were beautiful, and she saw no reason to look away. Both girls were 18 now, taller than most of the men at the Elkshade Basin Harvest Festival, with the kind of blonde hair that went nearly white in summer and darkened toward honey in the cold months. They had done real work their whole lives. They were not afraid of difficulty, that the land is poor, that there's no soil, no timber, no water we've found yet, that 40 acres of ridgestone isn't a beginning, it's an ending. Another long silence. The canvas snapped. "They know what the land is," Millie said. "They've been up this ridge. Papa knew before he signed it over." Lenora had thought of this already and didn't like what it implied. Either their parents believed something she didn't, or they had handed the girls a hard lesson dressed up as a gift. She wasn't sure which possibility troubled her more. "There's a well," Millie said. "Did you see it?" Lenora had seen it, a circular structure near the center of the claim, built from fitted stone, draped in dark moss, old enough that it looked grown from the ground rather than placed on it. She had noted it as a curiosity and moved past it, focused on the larger question of how anything useful could be made of the rest of the land. "An old well isn't a farm," Lenora said. "No," Millie agreed. "But a well on a ridge with no homestead nearby means someone thought something was worth the trouble of hauling stone up here and fitting it together. Whoever did that had a reason." Lenora said nothing. She turned the logic over in her mind the way she turned rocks over with her boot, looking at what lived underneath. The wind pushed at the canvas. The fire had gone to coals. "Tomorrow," Lenora said at last. "Tomorrow," Millie agreed. They reached the well before full morning light. It stood perhaps 4 feet tall and 6 across, built from stones fitted without mortar in the old manner, every piece chosen for how it interlocked with the next. The moss was deep green and gray and cold to the touch. The smell coming up from below was mineral and damp, not stale, not the smell of a dry shaft abandoned, but of something that moved. Lenora leaned over the rim. Cool darkness. Then she felt it, the faintest warmth, rising. The shaft was wider than it appeared from above, wide enough that Millie's shoulders didn't brush the sides. That was the first thing that struck Lenora as deliberate. A well dug for water didn't need to be that wide. Something else had been intended. "Going well?" Millie called up, her voice carrying strangely, a round resonance to it that wasn't echo exactly, but more like the sound returning from a large and empty room. Then, a few seconds later, "Oh." One word, but the quality of it, the held breath behind it, the slight upward catch, made Lenora tighten her grip on the rope and call down, "What? What is it?" A long pause. "Lenora." Millie's voice floated up quiet and serious. "You need to come down here." Lenora secured the rope around one of the stone outcroppings nearby, checked its hold, and went down herself. The shaft smelled of moss and cold mineral, and beneath that, something warmer, the particular damp warmth of moving water in enclosed stone. She descended perhaps 20 feet before her boots found not dirt, but a wooden plank, smooth and solid, and she let herself stand on it and look up at the circle of pale morning sky above her. And then she looked around. She was standing inside a room. Not a natural cave. A room. Stone walls fitted with the same careful mortarless technique as the well shaft above. Every stone chosen and placed, the walls nearly plumb, the ceiling supported at intervals by short sections of timber, dry and hardened with age. The floor was wooden planking, gray with time but unrotted, its boards overlapping in a deliberate pattern that she realized after a moment was designed to let air circulate underneath. The air she stood in was cool, but not cold, noticeably, measurably warmer than the ridge above. Millie was standing 20 feet away at the edge of a low stone channel, looking down into it, and in the channel, running clear and fast over shaped stone, was water, not a trickle, not seepage. She paced the dimensions of each room and recorded them, sketched the layout of the channels and the positioning of each doorway. The main living space was 20 feet by 14, smaller than their parents' front room, but proportioned cleverly, the ceiling high enough in the center to stand upright without stooping. The food cellar was 8 by 10, its chill reliable. The sleeping room was 12 by 8, dry and dark, the bunk frame solid enough that Lenora sat on it and felt nothing shift beneath her. Millie spent the first day examining what was left behind. Not much. Whoever had used this place had cleared it with care before leaving, or leaving for good. But there were details. Iron hooks set into the stone at regular intervals along the main room's walls, each hammered into cracks in the rock. A length of iron chain hanging from one of the ceiling timbers, rusted now but once clearly used to suspend something heavy. A lantern probably, or a pot, or The ventilation shaft above the sleeping room had partially blocked with decades of debris. Leaves, small stones, the remnants of a bird nest. Millie, being slightly narrower in the shoulders, climbed up into it by bracing against the walls and cleared it by hand, and when she came back down, the air in the sleeping room shifted and freshened noticeably within an hour. He knew what he was doing, Millie said, sitting on the floor of the main room that evening with her lantern, her face flushed from the work. Every piece of it is thought out. The water runs where he put it. The cold room stays cold because of where the water runs. The sleeping room is dry because of where it isn't. He lost livestock to storms, Lenora said. She had been thinking about the man all day. A. Kessler, 1871. Imagining the kind of stubbornness required to undertake this alone, the grief of losing animals to mountain weather, the particular determination of a man who decided that the mountain itself could be made to shelter what the weather threatened. This wasn't a game to him. He came up here in trouble and made something out of nothing. Millie looked at her. "Sound familiar?" Millie said. The third day they hauled the rest of their supplies down: flour, dried beans, the salt pork wrapped in cloth, the small tin of lard, the 2 good blankets, the spare rope. Setting the provisions onto the stone shelf brackets in the cold cellar and watching them hold, Lenora felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but steadiness. The sense of weight finding its proper resting place. That night, they slept in the bunk frame in the sleeping room with the lantern turned low and the water running somewhere close in the dark. Above them, 40 feet of stone and earth and the cold mountain night. Down here, still air, steady cool, the smell of clean water and old stone.
Both of them slept through until morning without once waking. In the 4th week, Lenora rode down to the valley. She found her father mending fence along the lower pasture and told him what they had found. She described the rooms, the water channel, the ventilation, the cold cellar, the fitted stone. She described A. Kessler's name cut into the rock. Her father listened without interrupting, which was how he listened when something mattered. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "I heard the name Kessler," he said slowly. "A stonemason. Worked this range in the late 60s, early 70s. People thought he'd gone strange up in the mountains." He looked at his daughter. He hadn't gone strange at all, had he? October came and the mountain made itself felt. The ridge above the well turned brutal. Wind that cut through wool and canvas both, temperatures that dropped to single digits before dawn, frost thick as paint on every stone surface by morning. Up above, the camp they'd maintained the first 2 weeks became impossible. They moved into the underground dwelling fully, and for the first 3 days of the cold snap, Lenora sat with her notebook and made careful notes of how the place responded to the weather change. It held. The temperature inside the main room varied by perhaps 8 degrees between morning and afternoon. The food cellar stayed cold enough to keep, but not freezing. The sleeping room, insulated by its thick walls and shielded from the water's direct chill, was the warmest space of all. They slept comfortably under 1 blanket each.
But 3 problems made themselves known. The first was the water channel, the portion of it closest to the entry of the main room, where the channel had been cut through a section of the outer stone wall, had developed a slow seep around 1 fitted joint. Not a flood, a seep, a thin trickle of moisture running down the interior wall and pooling at the base. In dry weather, it might have been ignorable. In the cold, the seep was beginning to ice, and ice in fitted stone expanded, and expansion was how fitted stone came apart. The second problem was the ceiling timbers. 2 of the 3 support sections in the main room showed softness at one end, not rot through, but the beginning of it, where moisture had found its way in over the years and begun quiet work. The timbers still held, but Lenora was a farmer's daughter, and she understood what still holds meant and what it did not. The third problem was light, or the lack of it. They had 2 lanterns and a reasonable quantity of oil, but the ventilation shaft that served the sleeping room was the only source of daylight in the entire underground dwelling, and it admitted light only at certain hours. The rest of the time, and especially on overcast days, which at altitude in October was nearly every day, they lived entirely by lantern light. It was manageable, but wearing in a way that was slow to name. The eye wanted something real. The mind wanted the sky, even a gray one. Lenora sat with the list of problems in her notebook one evening and ran her thumb down the page. The seep is the urgent one, she said. Millie agreed without argument, which meant she had already reached the same conclusion and was waiting for Lenora to arrive there. If it ices through the joint and forces the stone, we lose the seal on the outer wall. We need to repoint that section. Mortar. We don't have mortar. We have limestone. We have water. We have time. Millie looked at her across the lantern. You know how to make mortar. I know the principle of it, Lenora said carefully. I've watched Papa do the fireplace repairs twice. The principle. I've also watched it done poorly, Lenora added. And I know what poor work looks like when it cures, which is nearly as useful. Millie smiled. A small, real smile. The kind that meant she was genuinely pleased by something rather than simply polite about it. Then we try. They tried the next morning. Lenora ground the softest of the available limestone chips fine against a flat rock, mixed it with water in stages, and applied the resulting paste to the seeping joint, working it in with a stick whittled flat on one end. It was rough work. The mixture was imprecise. They watched it for 2 days. It held. The ceiling timbers were next, and harder. What the timbers needed was replacement, or at minimum, reinforcement. A new section of dry hardwood braced against the compromised sections to carry the load while the old timber was removed and replaced. The problem was wood. There was almost no timber on the ridge. The aspens below tree line were green and flexible, unsuitable for load bearing. What they needed was dry, seasoned hardwood, and the nearest source of that was 4 miles down the mountain, in the lower valley where the farm sat. Lenora made the trip on a clear day in mid-October, riding down through the aspens with the second mule on lead. At the farm, she loaded the mule with 3 sections of dry oak that had been seasoning in her father's lumber shed since a fallen tree the previous summer. Pieces her father had saved for fence posts, cut to 6-foot lengths. Her mother came out while she was loading. The timbers are soft, her mother said. 2 of them, not failed. Beginning. Her mother was quiet a moment, watching her daughter work the rope over the load. Then she went back inside and came out again with a cloth bundle, dried beef, a hard cheese, 2 onions, a tin of butter. She set it in the pack without comment. Mama, Lenora said. You'll need to eat, her mother said simply. Lenora rode back up. The installation took 3 days and required a kind of patience that Lenora had not known she possessed. They had no proper tools for timber work, no broad axe, no proper adze. They had a handsaw, a chisel, and a mallet. They worked by lantern in the low space of the main room, fitting the new oak sections in beside the old timbers, notching them where needed, driving wooden wedges at each end to tighten the fit against the stone above. On the second day, Millie sat back on her heels and put her face in her hands. Not crying. Something before crying. The deep tired that comes from sustained difficulty, when no part of the difficulty is dramatic enough to break into relief. I don't know if we're doing this right, she said. Lenora set down the mallet. This was unusual. Millie was generally the one who believed in the rightness of things before the evidence appeared. Hearing doubt from her sister in the small stone room, with the lantern low and the work half done, was different from Lenora's own internal doubts. Lenora's doubts were calculations, manageable, addressable. Millie's doubt was about the thing underneath. Tell me what you're afraid of, Lenora said. A long pause. That we fix everything that's broken, Millie said slowly. And it's still not enough to make a life here. That we work until spring, and then look at what we have, and it's still just 40 cold acres of nothing. Only now we've spent half a year proving that. Lenora thought about that for a while. The well, she said finally, was already built when we arrived. We didn't build the clever part. We just found it, and we've been making it livable. That's real work and it's real progress." She paused. "But you're right that we don't know yet what it becomes. We know what it is. We don't know what it's for." "What do you think it's for?" Millie asked. Lenora looked around the stone room. The water running in the channel. The new oak timber sitting solid against the compromised one. The cold cellar with its shelf brackets and their careful provisions. The clean walls. "Something we haven't thought of yet," she said. She picked up the mallet again. 3 days after the timbers were set, Lenora woke before dawn to a sound she did not immediately place. She lay still and listened. Millie was asleep across the room. The lantern had burned to nearly nothing, and from above, not the water channel, not the ventilation shaft, but from the well shaft itself, the entry point 20 feet overhead, came a low grinding sound, stone on stone. She was on her feet and holding the lantern high before she was fully awake, staring up the shaft. A crack had appeared in the well casing, 6 feet up. A fresh fracture, pale against the dark moss. Cold air poured through it. The frost had found them. She did not wake Millie. She sat on the floor of the main room with the dying lantern and looked at the crack and thought. The crack was in the well shaft above the living space, not in the dwelling walls themselves. The frost had worked a joint in the upper casing where the stone was older and the exposure greatest. The crack was not structural in the same way a failed ceiling timber would be, but if it widened, if ice continued to work it through the coming weeks, the shaft could fail. The shaft was their only entrance and exit. It was also their air. She thought about Millie saying, "Maybe it's still not enough." She thought about her father sliding the deed across the kitchen table. She thought about A. Kessler, 16 years gone, who had come up a cold mountain and lost animals and decided to go deeper rather than give up, who had built this room with his own hands, fitted every stone, channeled the water, made the cold do what he needed it to do, who had signed his name into the rock and left. He left, she thought, but he had also built so well that 16 years later, 2 girls climbing down a rope had found something worth keeping. She set the lantern down, picked up her notebook. The shaft. Work from outside. Repoint the upper casing before dawn. She woke Millie at first light, gray and quiet, the coldest morning yet. "The shaft," she said, and showed her the notebook. 1 sentence. The plan. Millie read it, looked up at the crack, looked at Lenora. "From above," Millie said. "We'd have to work from the rim." "Yes." "In that cold." "Yes." Millie was quiet a moment. Then she stood and began pulling on her coat and her heaviest wool socks, moving with the quiet efficiency she had when she'd made up her mind. "Then we'd better start," she said. They climbed the shaft in the gray pre-dawn, Lenora first with the remaining mortar mixture in a tin pail and Millie behind her with the tools, and they came out into a cold so hard it took the breath away cleanly and completely, the kind of cold that made the world feel mineral and unforgiving. The ridge was white with frost. The sky to the east was beginning to go pink and orange and entirely indifferent to their situation. Lenora assessed the crack from above. It ran 8 inches along the outer face of the shaft casing, about 3 feet below the rim. A clean fracture along one of the original stone joints, forced by freeze and thaw over years, and finally widened past recovery by the previous night's hard cold. The stone on either side of the crack was solid. The crack itself was the problem, and it was a manageable problem if the mortar held. The mortar needed to hold. She worked by feel as much as sight, her fingers going numb almost immediately in the cold, pressing the limestone paste into the crack and working it with the flat stick in long, firm strokes, filling the joint completely, packing it tight. Millie held the tin pail and passed the stick back each time and watched the work with eyes narrowed against the cold wind. Even, Millie said once, not instruction, but observation. Lenora smoothed the section again. Even. They packed the joint above the crack too, and the joint below it, sealing a full section of the shaft casing against further incursion. Then they spread the remaining paste over the outer rim, the section most exposed to weather, the section that had never been pointed since the original construction 16 years prior. It was rough work and cold work, and neither of them spoke much doing it. The sun came fully up while they were finishing, and its light fell across the ridge in long, cold slashes and made the frost go white and brilliant for a few minutes before the wind came and dulled it. When they climbed back down, the crack looked like nothing, a faint line barely visible beneath the fresh mortar, sealed and still. The cold air that had been seeping through it was gone. The shaft was whole again. They spent that afternoon, both of them tired in the bone, quiet with it, making a decision about what came next. The decision had been coming for a while. What they had was not a farm. It was not a house in the usual sense. It was something else, something that existed underground, protected and peculiar, and very good at a specific set of things. It was good at staying cold. It was good at keeping food. It was good at staying dry when the weather above was wet, warm when the weather above was brutal, still when the weather above was violent. A keeping place, Millie said. Say that again, Lenora said. That's what it is, a place for keeping. Food in the cold cellar, supplies out of the weather, seed stock through a hard winter. Anything that the mountain would destroy up above, you could bring here and it would survive. She paused. The valley farms don't have that, not reliably. Everyone loses something in a hard winter. Root cellars flood, spring houses freeze, grain bins go to mice. Lenora was writing in the notebook. A keeping place, she said, writing it. For the valley. For a fee, Millie said carefully. Lenora looked up. Millie met her eyes. We're not giving it away. We found it. We fixed it. We know how it works. If a family in the valley wants their seed corn kept dry through April, or their winter apples kept cold through February, or their good butter kept from going rancid, they pay us, Lenora said. They pay us, Millie confirmed. It was not a grand thing. It was not a thing anyone would likely write about or remember years later as remarkable. But it was sound. It was practical. It was the kind of business that fit the place exactly, that used what the place actually was, instead of pretending it was something it wasn't. They came down to the valley together in November, when the aspens were bare, and the mud of the lower trail had frozen hard in the ruts. They went first to the farm, and Lenora put the notebook on the kitchen table in front of her father and her mother, and laid out the plan in plain terms. What the underground homestead was, what it could do, what they intended to charge for its use, what they needed from their parents to begin. Primarily, the loan of the larger mule through spring. Their father read the notebook page. Their mother read it after him. Their father looked at his daughters across the table. Both of them standing in the kitchen they had grown up in, taller than he remembered, coats still on, cheeks still red from the ride down. A keeping place, he said. For the basin, Lenora said. He was quiet for a while. You fixed the mortar yourself? He asked. Twice, Millie said. He looked at the notebook again. Then he slid it back across the table to Lenora. You can have the mule through May, he said, and your mother will spread the word at the Basin Social next week if you want. Their mother was already nodding, pressing her lips together the way she did when she was keeping her feelings from running ahead of her. "Thank you, Mama," Millie said. Their mother stood and put her arms around both daughters at once, the way she had when they were small, and held on. By the following April, 12 families in Elkshade Basin had arrangements with the Wren sisters. Seed corn, winter apples, cured pork, medicinal herbs, grafting stock, all of it resting cold and dry in a Kessler's stone rooms beneath the ridge, safe through every storm the mountain had sent. On a clear morning that spring, Lenora climbed up the shaft and sat on the rim of the old mossy well and looked out at the basin below, green now, waking up, and wrote one line in her notebook. The worthless claim was never worthless. It was only waiting for someone to understand it. She climbed back down. There was work to do.